much for joining. Thank you very much for joining this Media Blue Expert session on the topic From Ocean Depth to Global Decisions, Bridging Science and Policy with Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative. The Media Blue Expert is a series of meetings organized by the Youth4Ocean Forum for you to learn about different blue career paths and to engage with professionals working in the field. As I already said, this is a recorded session, except for the Q&A in the end. So if you don't want to be in the recording, please turn your camera off. And also, please make sure that you are muted. My name is Sarah Mary Thomas. I am a facilitator of the Youth4Ocean Forum, and so is my colleague Ana Maria Marino. And I will now pass the floor to her for a brief introduction of the Youth4Ocean Forum.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone to this new Media Blue Expert. This is a very important and also, I think, a very signature event for us, and it's great that we can do this in collaboration with the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative today. So just wanted to spend a few words to talk about the Youth4Ocean Forum, which is organizing this event. And so just let me admit a few people. Just to move on. So what is the Youth4Ocean Forum? The Youth4Ocean Forum is a community, an open community that works towards making the ocean a concern of all EU citizens, especially through ocean literacy actions. We work, today we are a community that more than 430 members since 2020, which is the year in which this forum was created. This was actually a bottom-up initiative. So the forum was designed and it was started by a group of 40 founding members who are young people aged between 16 and 30 who are passionate about the ocean and also are leading projects that have to do with ocean conservation and ocean literacy as well. So as I said, we are a big community that is stretching through Europe and also beyond, because some of our members have in time also gone all over the world. And so we want to make sure that young people are inspiring each other, learning from each other, but also that they are connected to the larger European ocean literacy community to develop new innovative actions. How do we do it? By being part of a larger project or a larger coalition, which is the EU4Ocean Coalition. And the EU4Ocean Coalition is made up of three communities. One is the Youth4Ocean Forum, the other one is the EU4Ocean platform of experts and stakeholders in ocean affairs and ocean literacy, and also the network of European Blue Schools. As Youth4Ocean, our main mission is also to empower young people to be the voice of their generation, to build their capacities and skills to actually attend and advocate for the ocean, for ocean conservation, effective ocean conservation in high-level events and conferences. But we also do organize collective actions that are focusing on ocean literacy and that are youth-led. Finally, we also have the Young Ocean Advocate Program, which is a group of more than 250 young people who are project leaders, and they are leading or participating in certain projects that are connected, of course, to what the Youth4Ocean Forum is about. And we support those young project leaders with developing their projects, developing professional skills, training, but also to gain visibility for their own project. So they also are able to pitch their project, and just making sure that their project can be also effective and upscaled. So as part of what we do for our members, here we have the Meet a Blue Expert, which is usually actually something that we do for our members only, but then afterwards we actually publish the recording to the Meet a Blue Experts online on our YouTube playlist. But this time we decided together with the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative to actually open this episode and make sure that as many young professionals as possible can follow this. I hope I didn't speak too much, but these are our contacts, also the QR codes to join the Youth4Ocean Forum community, but also to see how to follow the process to submit your project and become a Young Ocean Advocate. And also we have our contacts. So thank you very much for listening, and I will give the floor back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Anna, for the introduction. And I will now hand it directly over to Eileen Thomas, who is the communications manager of DOSI.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you so much for organizing this event. It's great to be able to do this work with the Youth4Ocean Forum. So yeah, I'd just like to give a brief introduction to DOSI for anyone who's not come across us before. So we're a global network of experts, and DOSI was established in 2013. And the idea is to use independent scientific knowledge to inform and promote sustainable management of the deep ocean. And this is important because the deep ocean comprises about 96% of all the habitable space on Earth. And it hosts a wealth of biodiversity, supporting critical ecosystem functions and services. But recently, and increasingly, human activities have been affecting the deep ocean health. So there's a need for improved deep ocean governance within national and international frameworks. So we do this through our working groups. We have 10 working groups covering a few priority areas like climate change, pollution, minerals, and fisheries. And we have over 920 members within those working groups. And our working groups work to develop strategies to engage with a range of deep ocean stakeholders through, say, multidisciplinary workshops, policy briefings, publications, and interventions at key meetings. So our very special speakers today are members and leads of the DOSI BBNJ working group. So that's the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction working group. And I'm sure that Christina Marina will tell you more about that later. But the BBNJ working group has been leading DOSI's engagement during the development of the BBNJ agreement, and will continue to be a really important voice for the deep ocean during the agreement's ratification process. So if it's okay if we have the next slide, Anna or Sarah, I'm sorry, I don't know who's controlling it. Just so people can get the contact info. So yeah, so again, we have these QR codes similar to the Youth4Ocean ones. So if you'd like to learn more about DOSI or get involved in any of the working groups, you're very welcome to use these QR codes to join the DOSI network. You're also very welcome to email me. That's my email at the top there. We also have a weekly newsletter called the Deep Sea Roundup, which shares all the latest research and news and opportunities from the deep ocean community. So you're also welcome to sign up to be a subscriber to that. So yeah, so I'll hand the floor back, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Eileen. So now I have the honor to introduce our guest expert speakers, Marina Garwood and Christine Gabel. I'll just do a brief introduction. So Marina Garwood is a passionate marine scientist and educator, and she has extensive experience at the crossroads of science policy and community engagement. And she is a science policy advisor at DOSI, where she coordinates projects supporting responsible ocean stewardship, and she also guides collaborations between science policy and other disciplines. And then we have Christine Gabel, who is an interdisciplinary researcher with a focus on the use of scientific information in international biodiversity governance processes, such as the BBNJ agreement. and she leads the BBNJ working group on at DOSI. And yeah, so I very much look forward to hearing from both of you. And to our participants, I would like to invite you to start adding questions as we go. So during the presentation, you can already drop your questions in the chat, and then we'll get back to them later. So yeah, I think Marina, you start with your part of the presentation, correct?
Yes, please.
Okay, perfect. Take it away.
Would you mind popping these slides up on the screen for me? Thank you. Fabulous. Excellent. So welcome, everybody. It's so lovely to see a whole bunch of new names and some names that I recognize in our audience today. So Christine and I are just really going to be talking about our career journeys and some important lessons that we've learned along these crazy winding roads to get to where we are today. Could I please have the next slide? So just to walk you through what we're going to talk about, we're going to start with just generally how we got to where we are. Again, some crazy winding roads to be here and to find our path. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the science policy interface, some keynote tips, tricks, hints of getting involved in that, and what makes that particular interface so fascinating to each of us. And then we're going to get into considerations and advice before jumping into the Q&A. Next slide, please. So one thing I want to point out on this slide in particular, this is an image of Christine and I in front of the flags in the UN Hall of Flags. For those of you who aren't familiar with this is on the second floor of the UN headquarters at the New York office from just this past June when we went to the UN Preparatory Commission for some of the organizational meetings for the BB&J agreement. And in this hall has a flag for each member state of the UN. So I think there's 193 member states at the moment. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. But it's just really cool to be in that space and working with all of those different countries and people. So that's a picture we're really proud of. Again, we got that last June at our UN adventure. Could I have the next slide, please? But how I even got there, crazy journey there. So I started with a Bachelor of Science in zoology. And once graduating with that, I really worked in a couple of different aspects of that field. So I did everything from educational outreach with non-releasable exotics to pharmaceutical vivarium science. So really like a wide range in that field. But to me, it was always coming back to the oceans and like still trying to find, what even got me into biology in the first place. So after some career, highs and lows, especially around COVID and, needing to make some changes. I decided that I was going to, reconnect with my love of the ocean. And I found this really cool international marine science program over in Scotland. So I just got my Master's of Science in that last year. And one thing I really liked about this program is it wasn't only the science, but it was the people within that. And it's that fascination, this, really cool spot at the interface between science and people that I was able to meet DOSI, the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, and eventually work as a science policy advisor for them. And it's through this that I'm able to expand in one, like my particular facet, which is deep sea environmental impact assessments, but also some greater ocean policy work like that of the BB&J agreement. I am also an educator. I teach a series of undergraduate labs at Temple University. I'm based in the US outside of Philadelphia at the moment. So basically to get to where I am and to use my education to sort of leverage where I wanted to get into my career, I had to drive a lot. It took like a lot of passion and determination to do that. And we'll get more into that as we get into the advice section. But I'm now going to pass it over to Christine, if we could have the next slide, please.
Thanks, Marina. And thanks again, Sarah and Anna, for the invitation to be here today and to talk to you all. So science policy interfaces is something that I think about quite a bit, probably more than anyone should. I am in the last year of my PhD at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and it's focusing on science policy interfaces for the BB&J agreement, which we're going to dig into in a couple slides. And the reason that I fell into this space and that I love it so much is that, as Marina said, I have a very windy career path and journey as well that led me to where I am. And this is a space that isn't just about the science or just about the law, but also about the people and the communities. And it's a merging of all these different spaces and contexts, all for the same objective, which is conservation and sustainable use of the marine resources that we rely on as humanity. So I started off with a very different degree than what I'm currently pursuing now, which is a degree in law and human rights. And I loved the law. I love law, I love policy, but I was always drawn to the ocean. And so I bridged this with a Master's of Science in Marine Systems and Policies at the University of Edinburgh. And for that degree, I wrote a dissertation on BBNJ and had the pleasure of meeting people from the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative. And I instantly loved the community. I loved the network. It really kind of reflected on me these guiding ethos that I like to put into all of the work that I do. And it's interesting because in your introduction, you talked about inspiring and supporting each other. And these are the same qualities that I have found in DOSI and in the community that I work with DOSI. So what do I do now? I am the co-lead of the BBNJ working group, which we'll dig into in a couple slides, the activities that we do at the Science Policy Interface. I'm finishing off my PhD, and I'm a research associate with the Nippon Foundation University of Edinburgh Ocean Voices program, where I dig into science, policy, society interfaces in ocean governance. So this real nexus of the human rights, the human dimensions, the law, and the marine science. So that's a bit about me, and I'm going to pass back to Marina.
Fabulous. Thank you, Christine. One thing I also want to point out that's like really cool about both of our career journeys is I started in science and then I worked my way into policy versus Christine started in policy and now bridges science with that. So together we sort of bring in both aspects of that, which makes us a very, very good team for that. So more about working at the Science Policy Interface. So we are both in the BB&J working group, and we attend UN sessions as observer status. And our main goal is to, work as connectors. We're this amazing network of scientists. And at these sessions, we really focus on listening to learn and see where we can best support and where science can best support policy in various different aspects. But there are a lot of other events that DOSI works on, as well as the BB&J working group, such as like the Ocean Decade Conference. We put out policy briefs and workshops. We've had a hand in World Ocean Assessments by contributions through member presentations. Or we've also put out peer-reviewed papers. So we've done a lot. And like the key with that is that we are diversifying how we are trying to connect science with policy. There's not one direct route or road to be able to do that, like let's say correctly. It really depends on, the message you're trying to put forth and the intentions and the goals you're trying to achieve from there. So again, not one right way to do that. And one thing that's really special about DOSI is we do diversify what we output to be able to navigate those different paths and those different routes to get to solutions. Could I have the next slide, please? Fabulous. So a little bit more about the Science Society Policy Interface. So science itself is constantly evolving. I mean, as we learn new knowledge, we are then going to adapt to what that is saying. So science is essentially seeking answers for various different questions. And the language that is used in science is very intentional and it's very specific. And that's very similar for policy. The language they use is very intentional and very specific, but the language between science and policy, that's where you have to translate. Because again, they both try to be very intentional and specific and offer these different insights. But working at this interface, you have to essentially be able to read both languages there, both the science language and the policy. So with that, there's a lot of value in science in that this value lies in its ability to provide actionable insights that are rooted in data, that are rooted in evidence. So we can best support policy in that way through the data and the evidence that we do have to hopefully make the best decisions on a global scale that we can. Because these are decisions that are going to be impacting every community on Earth. It's not just, one city or one town. At the UN, again, United Nations, we're coming together to collaborate between science and policy and adapt to the changes that we're having from one day to the next as we move forward with the multiple complex challenges that this Earth faces. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it over to Christine.
Okay, so thank you, Marina. That is a little introduction to the Science Policy Society interface. And of course, we have this interface for all different ecosystems that humans try to oversee, manage, and conserve. But the one that Marina and I are working most directly in is called BBNJ. So I've provided here just a very short introduction. Can I get a show of hands from the audience? Who has heard about this BBNJ agreement? Marina has. Okay, great. So it looks like perhaps we have a few people who have heard about it and a few people who might not know as much about it and are interested in learning more. So if you go to the next slide, please, we'll dig into it now. So BBNJ stands for Biological Diversity of Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction. So it's first important to understand what we mean by areas beyond national jurisdiction. And this might seem like a very convoluted and complicated diagram here. Next slide, please. But what we'll see is that some of these areas in the ocean are within national jurisdiction, therefore under the jurisdiction and oversight of the coastal state, and some are beyond. So you'll hear areas referred to as the high seas, and this is the water column outside of areas beyond national jurisdiction. Or another word that we hear quite often, especially with the emerging discussions around deep seabed mining, is the area. And so in international law and under UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the area is the seabed and the subsea floor beyond national jurisdiction. And there's generally 200 nautical miles that are within national jurisdiction, and then the remaining would be what we call the high seas and the area. Next slide, please. And as we can see here, areas beyond national jurisdiction account for the majority of the global ocean. However, despite this, for a very long time, we did not have an international legally binding agreement to oversee the conservation and the sustainable use of the resources found in these areas, despite them accounting for most of the global ocean. Next slide, please. So this is where the BBNJ agreement comes in. So the BBNJ agreement, the discussions to finalize this agreement have been ongoing since the early 2000s. Negotiations kicked off in 2018. And excitedly, just last year, the final text of the agreement was agreed and adopted. But this doesn't mean that the BBNJ agreement is entered into force yet. And so under the BBNJ process, there is a requirement for 60 ratifications in order for the agreement to enter into force. So this is when a state formally agrees to be bound by the provisions that are set out in the agreement. So we have the agreement, but states have to go to the UN and say, yes, as a state, we agree that we will be bound by the provisions and that we will follow the obligations set out in this agreement. So that's where we are right now. And Marina talked about the Preparatory Commission, or the PrepCom, and states have come together to organize these preparatory meetings in order to discuss some of the issues that will need to be sorted out before the agreement enters into force, in order for states to hit the ground running once this does happen. Next slide, please. So that's the history of the BBNJ agreement, but what does it entail? What does it bring to international environmental governance? Why is it important? So there's four main pillars of the agreement. The first is marine genetic resources. So this is around the genetic resources and the digital sequence information of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, including rules to access these resources, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits derived from them. Next slide, please. The one that has a lot of people jazzed, especially in the community, the conservation community, is area-based management tools, and this includes marine protected areas. So under the BBNJ agreement, states will be able to come together and propose and designate areas in need of additional protection, which is quite special for international waters. Next slide, please. So we don't just have conservation, we also have sustainable use. And one of the big things that relates to sustainable use is environmental impact assessments. So before the BBNJ agreement, there wasn't an overarching agreement or rules around procedures for undertaking EIAs or environmental impact assessments for activities. But now under BBNJ, this is something that is going to be done for any activity that could cause substantial harm to the environment. Next slide, please. And the fourth pillar is capacity building and transfer of marine technology. And even though this is a fourth pillar, it's also something that cross-cuts the whole agreement. And this is to ensure that all states have the scientific capacity and capabilities, not just to engage in marine scientific research in areas beyond national jurisdiction, but to benefit from it. Next slide, please. And of course, cross-cutting all of these, we have some cross-cutting issues such as institutional arrangements, dispute settlement, finance arrangements, and all these other fun things that we find in multilateral environmental agreements. And for the scientists in the room, one of the ones that people are quite excited about is the scientific and technical body. So this is a scientific advisory body that will be providing scientific advice to states in order to inform decision-making under the agreement. Next slide, please. And I will pass over to Marina.
Fabulous. So we are now going to dive into considerations and advice for science and policy engagement. Next slide, please. Fabulous. So Christine, I'm actually going to have you start with the first two bullet points here.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. So Marina and I have been meeting quite a bit over the past couple months, and one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about is how we can improve our science policy engagement and our advice. So how can we be the most effective when we go to these events? How can we make sure that the right information is in the hands of the people who need it at the right time? And so when we were putting together this slide, we had a bit of a brainstorm and we tried to consolidate some of these messages that we've really been spending some time thinking about. And the first one that we touched on was about the importance of being prepared. So when you're going into these spaces, it doesn't matter if you're from a scientific background or have a legal background. It's important that you're prepared and that you do your research. So what might this look like? It could look like knowing who the key players are. So looking at the BBNJ agreement and the process to negotiate it, we would have a list of the key states and their positions on different issues. We would know who the delegates were from these key states. We'd also know other key actors, whether it be from fisheries bodies or other intergovernmental organizations or sectoral bodies. And one of the things that we found quite important here was that if you have a law background, that doesn't mean that you don't have to touch up on all the scientific parts that might come under discussion and vice versa. It's really important to do your interdisciplinary research and come to these sessions prepared if you want to bridge the gap between science and policy. The second point that we wanted to touch on was around the value of meaningful partnerships and collaboration. So engaging in science policy interfaces is a lot more than just bringing your policy brief to a space, handing it out and saying, okay, that's me done. The policymakers now have that information. They're going to follow it and job well done. In fact, it's actually more about building relationships, fostering trust, and meaningful relationships and meaningful partnerships. So oftentimes we would sit at the back of the negotiating room during the BBNJ negotiations, and we would have our WhatsApp just going off during certain discussions because we had made these connections with the delegates and we had said we are here in case you need any advice. And that's the types of relationships that really foster this long-term trust and collaborative approaches to science policy interfaces instead of a one-way direction of us just bringing our policy briefs, dropping it off and saying, adios. And I'm going to pass to Marina now to talk about the importance of knowing the boundaries of your expertise, because I think this leads on from this point.
Yes, excellent. Thank you so much, Christine. And it's like this value that we place on collaboration that you know allows us, I think, to like learn and expand more. So the know your boundaries of your expertise. This is really the point saying it's okay to say I don't know, but you always have to follow it with, but I want to learn more. So you don't have to have all of the answers right off the bat. I mean, another piece of advice not listed on here is definitely listening as you're trying to make any type of career transition. And there's a difference between like hearing something and listening to something, right? So you want to listen to understand. And you'll find that with the boundaries of your own expertise, that just gives you different avenues that you can then grow and expand on. So never feel intimidated if you don't know something. Just use that as an opportunity to learn more. And the next point that I wanted to talk about was to be the one to start the conversation. When I started making the transition into policy, I sent a lot of cold emails, just trying to make connections and get to know people and learn how they, you know, started out on their career journey. And, you know, life's greatest endeavor is that of good conversation, and people are always happy to talk. Especially about their career journeys, or if you're trying to learn more about environmental science, like scientists love to talk about their specific subject. And so they'll happily chat with you. And it's these connections that are going to lead to that meaningful collaboration and expanding your knowledge in that way. And then I also wanted to make a note about staying optimistic and like how powerful that is in the policy space. I mean, any environmental course that you take throughout your whole life is always going to end in a conversation about climate change and you know, the adaptations that we might have to do to adjust to that. And a lot of climate change conversations can, you know, sound a little bit doom and gloom, but being in rooms with these amazing people from all over the world who may not speak the same language as you, but at the UN, it could be translated in real time in your ear, which is amazing. I can see how many people are working hard to create positive change to leave the planet a better place than how we found it. So please stay optimistic, like in this realm. Sometimes things can get bogged down with, you know, the logistics of one thing or another, but it's the overarching goal and collaboration and, you know, the drive for growth and knowledge that is going to keep this going and to help us keep improving in that way. Next slide, please. So some other opportunities to engage in ocean advocacy. In terms of policy engagement, citizens science, and local initiatives, I know at least where I live, we have a ton of local initiatives. It doesn't have to start at the global scale. You might want to start smaller and like get your feet wet and see how you like it. So particularly for like citizen science, I know like my dad is a hobby fisherman off the coast of New Jersey here. So he actually has an app on his phone where he can record like the species he catches and like when he catches them to the Fish and Wildlife Service here, which is awesome. So that's just like one example of how you can get involved in citizen science that way. And there are also a lot of local initiatives for if you have a local Division of Natural Resources. When I worked for them, we used to do coffee talks where we would just start conversations with the community about like, you know, maybe one particular conservation project that we had going on. And so it's really about like keeping an eye out and joining these networks like DOSI or the Ocean Census Network or any of these newsletters so that you know what's going on when. And given a lot of the networks listed here, they're going to be more expansive on an international scale, but pay attention to your local community because that's like where policy is happening. I know at least in the US, the trend is like, we think policy only happens every 4 years during a major election or something like that. But people are working every day in environmental policy and in ocean law. So be sure to stay engaged and use your voice. Always try starting a conversation. The worst somebody's going to tell you is no, and in which case, okay, move on, next conversation, you know? So nothing to be scared about there. We're all just people. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to say a couple of thank yous. Christine and I are so grateful to be here today. Thank you, Ellen, Anna, and Sarah, as well as the EU Blue Schools, the Youth4Ocean Forum, as well as EU4Oceans, as well as DOSI and Maria for supporting us in all that we do and allowing us to do all that we do, and Youth and Environmental Europe as well. So grateful to be here. This QR code down at the bottom is specifically for our Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Working Group, so feel free to scan that or to reach out to Christine and I via these email addresses on the slide. And thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate it.